The day began with an unnerving stillness, the kind that sailors know often precedes chaos. For the crew of the Coast Guard cutter Orion, it was supposed to be another monotonous day of patrolling the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific, about 60 miles off the coast. The sun was a relentless white disk in a bleached blue sky, and the sea was a sheet of polished glass. But beneath that placid surface, a darkness was stirring. It started not with a bang, but with a whisper. A young sonar operator, Mike, his face illuminated by the green glow of his console, leaned in closer. A faint, almost imperceptible blip had appeared on his screen. It was ephemeral, ghost-like, a signal that was there one moment and gone the next. He dismissed it at first as a phantom, a school of fish, or a thermal layer playing tricks on the equipment. But the signal returned, faint yet persistent. It didn't behave like anything natural. He reported it to the bridge. Captain Anderson, a man whose weathered face was a roadmap of storms weathered and crises averted, weighed the report. His gut, honed by 3 decades at sea, told him this was no anomaly. It was a thread, and he had to pull it. "Bring us about," he commanded, his voice calm but firm. "Let's go take a look." As the Orion altered its course, a lookout armed with powerful binoculars scanned the horizon. "Contact," he shouted. "Bearing 290, unidentified object in the water." Through the haze, they could see it. A low-profile shape, a sliver of dark blue against the deeper blue of the ocean. From a distance, it could have been a whale or a piece of floating debris. But as they closed the distance, its unnatural form became clear. It was a self-propelled semi-submersible, a narco-sub, built for one purpose: to move vast quantities of illegal drugs undetected. Its hull was made of fiberglass and painted a specific shade of blue to absorb radar signals and blend with the sea. It rode so low in the water that only its small cockpit, or sail, broke the surface. It was a ghost, designed to be invisible to all but the most vigilant eyes. The radar confirmed their suspicions. It couldn't get a solid lock. The signal danced and flickered, a testament to the vessel's stealth design. Captain Anderson tried to hail it on all channels. "Unidentified vessel, this is United States Coast Guard cutter Orion. Identify yourself. I repeat, identify yourself." The only response was the hiss of static. The sub was running silent. Was it abandoned, or were its occupants simply refusing to answer? Anderson made a decision. He ordered a boarding team to prepare. Brendan, a seasoned tactical officer with nerves of steel, and John, a brilliant young engineer who could coax any machine back to life, were chosen for the task. They were the best. As they geared up, the mood on the Orion's bridge grew tense. Everyone knew the risks. These narco-subs were often scuttled by their crews to destroy evidence, taking anyone on board with them to a watery grave. A rigid-hulled inflatable boat was launched, and it sped across the water, closing the gap to the silent submarine. As Brendan and John stepped onto its slick, curved surface, they were struck by the crudeness of its construction. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a vessel, welded together in some remote jungle shipyard, yet it was undeniably effective. They found a hatch near the sail and, using a pry bar, forced it open. A foul stench of diesel fumes, sweat, and something else, something acrid and chemical, wafted out. They peered into the darkness below. A rusty ladder descended into the belly of the beast. Exchanging a tense glance, they began their descent. The interior was cramped and suffocating. The air was thick and heavy, and the only light came from their helmet-mounted flashlights. The walls were damp and cold. They found themselves in a narrow corridor with a small control room at one end. The controls were a bizarre mix of old and new, repurposed gauges from old tractors, a steering yoke that looked like it belonged on a small airplane, and a sophisticated GPS system. It was clear that people had been here recently. There were discarded food wrappers and empty water bottles, but there were no bodies, no signs of a struggle, just an eerie, unsettling emptiness. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from above. They looked up in horror as the heavy steel hatch slammed shut, plunging them into absolute darkness. Their hearts pounded in their chests. They were trapped. John fumbled for his radio. "Orion, this is John. Do you copy? The hatch is sealed. We're locked in." Silence. The submarine's thick hull was blocking their signal. Back on the Orion, panic began to set in. One moment they had a visual on their men. The next, the sub's hatch had slammed shut and all communication was lost. As Anderson tried to process what had happened, a low, powerful hum began to emanate from the water. The narco sub was coming to life. Its engines had been started remotely. Slowly, inexorably, the submarine began to sink. It slipped beneath the waves with a final gurgling sigh, disappearing from view. The sonar operator watched in horror as the blip descended, deeper and deeper, until it was lost in the abyss. Brendan and John were gone. Inside the sub, the two men fought to control their rising panic. The pressure was building, the hull groaning around them. They checked for leaks, but the vessel was sound. It was descending with a terrifying purpose. Hours passed. The air grew thin, and their movements became sluggish. They were running out of time. Driven by a desperate hope, they began to search the sub. In a small compartment behind the engine room, they found it. Tucked away behind spare parts and oily rags was a large, sealed container. They pried it open. Inside, wrapped in black plastic, were dozens of bricks of cocaine. They had found the payload. They were inside a ghost ship carrying a fortune in drugs, sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Just as they were about to succumb to despair, they felt a change. The downward momentum slowed, then stopped. The vibrations of the engines changed pitch. They were rising. A surge of hope, sharp and painful, shot through them. Were they being brought back to the surface? The sub broke the water with a jolt. They scrambled to the periscope and peered out. What they saw stole the breath from their lungs. They were not in the open ocean. They were inside a vast, cavernous structure, a floating dock concealed within what looked like a massive offshore oil rig. But it was no oil rig. It was a mobile, sea-borne fortress, a criminal enterprise on an unimaginable scale. They watched in stunned silence as the hatch was opened from the outside. Men in overalls, their faces hard and emotionless, began to board the sub. They moved with a practiced efficiency, unloading the cocaine and moving it onto the platform. Brendan and John flattened themselves into the deepest shadows of the engine room, barely daring to breathe. They were trapped in the heart of the snake's nest. They knew that discovery meant certain death. Their military status made them a liability that the cartel could not afford. They were not just witnesses. They were evidence. They would be tortured for information, then disposed of without a trace. Their only hope was to remain invisible, to become shadows within the shadows. Days bled into one another. They survived on scraps of food they had found and rationed their water. They learned the rhythms of the platform, the shifts of the workers, the arrival and departure of other vessels, the cold, businesslike demeanor of the man who appeared to be in charge. They realized this was a central hub, a distribution point for narcotics destined for markets all over the world. During a shift change, they saw their chance. Under the cover of darkness, they slipped out of the sub and onto the platform. It was a city of steel, a labyrinth of catwalks and corridors. They moved silently, like ghosts, searching for a way out. They found a communications room, but it was heavily guarded. They found lifeboats, but they were watched. Their salvation came in an unexpected form. A supply helicopter was scheduled to arrive. It was their only chance. As the helicopter landed and began to unload its cargo, they made their move. They sprinted across the exposed helipad, the wind from the rotors tearing at them. They scrambled aboard, hiding themselves amongst the crates just as the crew was preparing for takeoff. The helicopter lifted off, and they felt a surge of exultation. They had done it. They had escaped. As the platform shrank into a tiny speck below them, they finally allowed themselves to breathe. Using a satellite phone they had found in a crate, they contacted the Coast Guard. They gave their coordinates, a detailed description of the platform, its operations, its defenses. Within hours, a massive joint task force was mobilized. Navy warships, Coast Guard cutters, and Special Forces units converged on the location. The ensuing raid was swift and overwhelming. The cartel, caught completely by surprise, had no chance. The platform was seized, its crew arrested, and a staggering amount of drugs and money was confiscated. It was one of the largest and most successful counter-narcotics operations in history. Brendan and John returned not just as survivors, but as heroes. They had stared into the abyss and had not flinched. They had brought down a criminal empire. And as they finally set foot on solid ground, they knew they would forever be changed by the secrets the ocean had revealed to them.